on this computer. It is being recorded, great. Hello and welcome to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud Developer Group. I think this is our second or maybe third meeting this year. And I'm very privileged to have Doug Midgley from Accenture with us today, who's going to be taking us through the awesome tool set that they've built to enable Marketing Cloud users to deploy automations, content, and a lot more. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Doug, and maybe you can introduce yourself, and then I'll be following up and walking us through Package Manager, which is new to Marketing Cloud in the April release. So over to you, Doug.
Sure thing. All right, let me just get started on this side here, and I'll just start sharing from here. Can you let me share, Eliot? Super. All right, so you should be able to see a large purple Accenture colored arrow, and I'm assuming that's going great right now because it looks like that's the case. I'm super excited to talk with everyone here today. I have been basically taking a couple of different chances to present these tools to a bunch of different people since we've open sourced this a couple of weeks ago, or months ago now, I guess. We've been working quite a lot on this setup, and this is basically the same presentation. We're going to actually have at Trailhead DX coming up very soon, so very excited to kind of go through it with you as a preview of what we've got there. It's open source, as I mentioned, and we're going to walk through here about some of the things that we've done, the background, how it works, a bit of a deep dive through demo, and then also talking about the future and a little bit on the roadmap there. My name is Doug Midgley. I am the Salesforce Digital 360 lead here in the Netherlands for Accenture. I work a lot in those kind of, let's say, weird marketing cloud areas where you get asked to do those strange things. And one of those strange things is really what led us down the track of Salesforce Marketing Cloud DevTools. Let's get it all started. So first thing, as basically all of you are going to know, this is the case that Marketing Cloud is not part of the core platform, right? And that really leads us to a lot of challenges when we have rollouts, because often we're dealing with clients that have basically an expectation that everything that works on the core platform is going to work very similarly in the other platforms, like, for example, Commerce, MuleSoft, or Marketing. And as we all know, that's kind of not the case. We have here more of a sample that you might, for example, see in core, where you have sprints and you have releases, and you go from the design, build, test, and deploy. You'll use your dev, your QA, and a production environment, sandboxes. And you'll use tools like SFDX to get it from one environment to the next. So you might have a Git repository sitting behind there using that source-driven development to be able to move that between those sandboxes. As mentioned, that doesn't really work on Marketing Cloud for quite a few reasons. First of all, no sandboxes. So officially, we don't have any sandboxes, and that makes it really hard to make sure we're replicating everything identically. There's not APIs for everything. So we've been working really hard to try and dig out from the APIs using a lot of different ways to try and figure out ways that we can deal with those challenges between the SOAP and the REST APIs. But there's no real comprehensive tooling or metadata API to use. There's also no real tools that you can use set up for this. So we don't have a Marketing Cloud SFDX. And that really puts some challenges here. Lastly, there's kind of a blurry boundary between metadata and data in Marketing Cloud. I think we can all agree that things like, for example, automations or configuration, like some settings, those are pretty, let's say, metadata-like. But when it comes to other things that we might have, for example, content, is that metadata? Is that data? Do we really want to deploy that? Should we manage it in a Git repository? There's some kind of blurriness there, which means that there's not a really one-size-fits-all approach. What we saw with challenges with clients was because we were kind of getting asked to try and replicate this core approach into what was happening in Marketing Cloud, trying to figure out how we can actually use that. We actually came up with a few different challenges, and we were actually doing this with one particular client, which triggered this all off, where we had 70 different markets which were being deployed, all using Salesforce. And what we had initially was going basically from having one market deployed after the other, potentially a couple at a time if we had larger teams. And that was really taking a huge amount of time. And what we wanted to do was basically try and automate that via scripts. And this was kind of the trigger that we had. And this is essentially where we got MCDEV Tools from. which basically let us really get to those kind of 80% savings on rollouts. Now that sounds like a huge claim, but realistically what we're doing is really using the scripting. All of you that are really into IT and things, you know, why spend 10 minutes doing something manually that you can spend 3 hours automating? Was really the mantra that we took on our side, and we said, you know, how can we automate this to make it a more efficient and effective experience? So what we did was basically script things so that we can roll out, for example, 80 business units in the same amount of time that it takes to roll out to one. And that was really the objective here, so that we can reduce that. Now I'm going to go through, this is really much more than just trying to save time, but it does give you this kind of high level of why really we triggered off this discussion and where we really wanted to get started from. It was about trying to save time, make it easier for everyone involved. So what is MCDEV Tools? Well, in this case, we're talking about basically 4 core features, right? So at the moment, we're talking about retrieving metadata. So being able to actually retrieve all the data that's available on the Marketing Cloud server. Potentially, there's some limitations in that. Again, APIs dependent here. But we've basically tried to support as many things as we can when it comes to retrieve. We're also welcome, if you'd like to make an attempt, you're more than welcome to also submit pull requests and contribute to our project. That will then give you an ability to then retrieve all the metadata, put it onto your local system. So you can actually have that locally and you can see exactly what's going on. The next thing we can do is then basically do preparing for deployments. Now there's 2 main things that we do here. One is changing those manually. So having, for example, JSON files, we'll go through that in a second, that you can then edit and manually adapt, but then also this templating. And this is really where that speed factor comes in when you've got those huge rollouts. So these kind of templating approaches are basically retrieving the data and saying, well, actually this here is a replacer, so we can actually roll this out. We just need to change this country code. We just need to change this name for every different market. So what we did is we made a way to basically template all of these things. And it's actually surprisingly not so dissimilar from what you're seeing in Package Manager. We then have the ability to go and upload those to 1 business unit, 2 business units, 2 instances, 3 instances, whatever you like, any combination. Essentially, it's something that we can support. We can deploy things. Again, depends on the metadata, it depends on the APIs we can do to what we can actually deploy from a metadata perspective. But we've tried to support as many as we can as possible. Lastly, what we have is really two features here, which is something that I actually probably use these for, to be honest, the most. It's actually searching and documentation. So we have certain clients which are really asking for, how can we get a copy of everything to understand where this data extension is used? How can I understand if this field is used in a journey somewhere? And what we're able to do is use those standard kind of developer tools like VS Code to be able to actually just go through and search all the metadata and say, oh yeah, this field is used in this journey, in this journey, in this journey. Are those journeys used? No, they're finished, they're finalized. Okay, but safe to remove that data extension. Or, for example, having clients which really want to have documentation and they want to have every single data extension documented in Confluence. Well, we got really bored of doing that manually. So what we did is we just scripted based on the metadata that we were retrieving. We scripted the markdown formats for that. So we're going to have a quick check out at that as well. Now, before we just jump into the demo, I just want to kind of go through here. Again, I mentioned really the speed factor here. So this time factor is one of those huge things that really drove us to try and improve here. But we're talking more about the general deployment of a lot of different aspects of a Marketing Cloud implementation. So we're talking about things like quality, like manually copying stuff from one place to another, we all know is a bad idea. We all make mistakes. And having this kind of automated and scripted means that if you make the mistake in one place, you're at least sure you're going to make it everywhere. So that means that you're going to find out any issues much earlier on, and you're going to be able to basically copy things exactly in one place to how exactly they should be in a different place in exactly the same order without any worries about having someone make those small manual mistakes. It's about transparency, making sure that whatever we retrieve, we can actually store in a Git-based kind of approach, a pretty standard, to be able to see, well, this query was running fine last week, what changed? So you can have, for example, scripted and automated values that basically then copy things, for example, every day. You could run it through a CI/CD pipeline where it downloads all the metadata every single day. So you're able to then check what the differences are. We can also go to those DevOps approach. So doing things like pull requests. We can actually support a lot of this stuff within the CI/CD pipelines. You saw the icons on the last slide. Those are actually kind of the intended goal of this. Of course, for each person and each project, it's going to be a little bit different. So we leave that to you. It really means that you need to have a proper setup if you really want to go down that path, and it will certainly increase delivery times. But if your clients are really demanding that you have this kind of approach, it opens up new possibilities around kind of segregation of duties. And lastly, standardization. Certainly from the Accenture perspective, we work with a lot of different projects where we do a lot of the same stuff because a lot of the same things are needed. They're not standard in Marketing Cloud yet, but we know that if we want to create a data extension and have it imported into all subscribers, there's a standard way to do that. Now, what we're trying to get to do here is really have those pre-built packages, not so dissimilar from what you're going to see from Package Manager, to be able to say, how can we basically just copy this to every single client that we work with so we can spend our time working on more kind of useful or usable features in the future, rather than just those mundane everyday tasks. So without ado, I'm going to jump across and give you guys a quick demo of what we've got here. Keep in mind, this is very high level and very quick, just because we've got some time constraints. So I'm going to go through. First thing to start off with, we've just opened VS Code. There's a couple of things we need to do as a prerequisite. And what we're going to do is basically check those out here. It's available on NPM, so you can just look for MCDEV on NPM. And you can see here, we've got a huge amount of documentation about exactly how all this works, all the commands and everything that's available. Now, there's a couple of prerequisites you need to set up with Node and Git. For those of you that are developers, you're potentially going to have those already prepared, so you don't even need to worry about it. What we're going to do is start off here where you can see, for example, MCDEV Tools and initial setup. So you can see here to install this. This is the command we're going to run. I'm going to make it globally available. Now, for the presentation, this takes a couple of minutes to run, so I haven't actually run this myself. I'm not going to run this here because I've already run this, actually. But we're going to go straight into actually how we get this initialized. So as soon as you've run this command, then you can get ready to go. By making this a global project, what we can do is actually just call MCDEV directly. And that lets us, we can just hit here. Basically, will tell us, you need to actually call a specific command. And what we've built is really the CLI approach here, which gives you all the information you might want to understand in case you've forgotten. There's also information here about aliases. So if you don't want to type retrieve, you can just type R, for example. The first one we're going to start off with here is init. And init is, unsurprisingly, really a good place to start. Whoops, sorry. MCDEV init. So we're going to start off there. And what it's going to do is really walk us through setting up this project. So this is the same kind of stuff that you guys would exactly do for a new project. It's going to make a bunch of assumptions based on your standard Git usernames. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions. In this case, asking for a repository if you've got a remote one. In this case, for the demo, I don't. It's going to install a bunch of things. You can see here the files are automatically getting created for you. Some formatting files for those of you that are familiar with Prettier or ESLint. It's now installing a bunch of things for you, which lets you kind of basically format certain files. Particularly, that's relevant for server-side JavaScript, where we have automated formatting. We don't have to worry about kind of manually going into a cloud page and editing things or whatever. We can actually just format it here directly and then deploy it straight to a script activity to run. We are going to have to do, however, is set up a installed package. So now the next thing we'll do, again, prepared this already, is basically create an installed package. We recommend you do this at the parent level because normally you're going to be doing this for the entire instance. And you'll be able to go into install packages, make sure it's enabled for all business units. And we've mandated essentially that you have to give it all current scope. Again, there's some things here that will still work without it. And I think in a lot of cases, we don't actually do anything with SMS. So if you didn't give it SMS, it will be fine. But in future, if we added new features, we wanted to make sure that those still work correctly. So we've just said you should provide all access here. It will still work without it in a lot of cases. Here, what you're going to need is client ID. I'm going to delete this afterwards, so don't even bother trying to use it. So here, the credential name. So we're going to call it, in this case here, developer group. I'm going to put in the client ID. It's going to ask for client secrets. The name can be anything you like. The client secret and stuff obviously can't. Oops. And this authentication URL. You don't need to worry about the rest and the SOAP. We actually go and extract that for you, so it will do it by itself. We test the credentials to make sure they're valid, so you haven't made any mistakes. We'll download all these different business units you can see here, some things that are available. And what it's doing is then basically going to commit these files as kind of your baseline. Now, the first thing it's going to do is then ask you if you want to download all the business units already. In this case, we're going to do no, because I've decided that I want to have some specific commands. So the first one of that is going to be select types. Now, this select types basically lets you decide what kind of metadata you want to actually download. You can think about this as like the package XML in SFDX. So in this case here, we're going to see there's a whole bunch of different choices, and you can see a bunch of disabled. If you want, you can run that with a debug flag, so it's --debug, and you can access those. They're just because for most users, it's not really necessary, so we've turned them off by default. but you can always access them. For me, the API discovery one's great. For each release, I go in and check what's actually changed, so I can see if there's any new exciting endpoints that I'm able to use, or have a sneak peek at what future features are going to be available. So in this case, we're going to take data extensions and automations. We won't take any of these ones here at the bottom, which I think is a really good start. And what we're going to do is say, cool, got those. And we're going to go to the configuration file here. Now, I'm just going to show you this just so you're aware of what's going on. And this config file basically just has the credential that we set up here, developer group, and it has the business units available. Has some other configuration options, some things to do with deployment. We've got some CI/CD commands there, which I'm not going to go into today. Some directory information, where do you want to save it? It's your choice. You can change where you want to save that to, as well as things like the market information. Now, this is going to be really important in a second. So while we're here, I'm just going to put in some pre-prepared stuff that I did earlier, because otherwise it's going to take me a little while to prepare. And what we're going to do here is basically say these are the replacer values. So you can think about these as saying for each business unit, if it's the French business unit, please know that it's this MID. It's going to be called this. The shared folder where I want to put the French data extensions is this. The suffix is this, and the country code will be this here. And so this lets us then run those scripts essentially automated for templating. The last thing I'm going to just point out here is really this retrieve. So you saw before that we had this select types, and essentially all that's doing is this here. You can also just manually adapt these. So I could, for example, just remove import file if I wanted to, would still run fine. It's just that it's a nice way to do it, to be able to understand which ones you can select from in the first place. So we're trying to make it nice and easy with the CLI. Now, if I want to start running here, I'm going to go into MCDEV, and I'm going to hit retrieve. Again, we've tried to make things easy. So I haven't actually selected where I want to retrieve it from here. And it will actually ask me. So I can also provide this directly, and so it speeds it up a little bit. But if I want to, I can also then use the CLI here. So I'm going to select developer group credential. And I'm going to select here the example I've got from Germany. And this is then going to go and download. It's going to cache a whole bunch of stuff. We do caching, and I'll show you why that's the case in a second. And then it's going to go and download a whole bunch of things that are available. You'll see this retrieve starts to pop up here, which has got data extensions, queries, automation in it. If we take a look at data extensions, you can see these values. You can see the keys here we're using. I know Package Manager uses essentially numbers. We use the external keys. So external keys for data extensions are all detailed here. And whatever you put in will come up. So that means it's finally a good incentive if you're using the tools to be able to set a correct customer key. And actually our advice, we kind of softly enforce this through the tools. So when you try and deploy things, it will usually 9 times out of 10 try and change the customer key if it's a GUID to the name so that they match nicely together. So it's easier to find here in the UI. In this case here, you're going to see an example of a file, which you can see here, example DE. With just one field. If you look then at, for example, bounce data, you can see that there's a whole bunch of fields here that are available, and it's got all that information. So this is a really great way for you guys to see when people are adding fields, if you've got this set up in Git. And it's also really the baseline of what we do for the documentation aspects. Now, that's been all set up and downloaded. We can also see, interestingly, on the query perspective, we're looking at the same kind of metadata with this underscore R path here. We kind of took this from the standard Salesforce setup, where we said, actually, it'd be really nice that we didn't have a value of a folder with ID 123, like what's returned from the API, but rather we had a real path. And actually, we have logic here that actually converts this path, and will automatically try and create that path if possible, so that you can put in, for example, data views. And this will, if we try and deploy this, basically create the data views folder, if that's possible, and it will then try and deploy it into that folder directly. If it already exists, it will just deploy it to where it exists already. The more interesting one for developers, and this works the same for server-side JavaScript, is we actually extract this SQL, and we extract the server-side JavaScript into a file which can then be used with linting. So for example, in here, I've got some SQL linters already available in VS Code. Because it ends in SQL, it's automatically going to tell me, oh, you screwed up, Doug. It doesn't have 2 wheres. That doesn't make sense. So very simple linting stuff here, but it also helps. It also means you can do your formatting. So in this case here, I've got some editors. So I can automatically do formatting without having to worry about anything else. I don't have to worry about having this huge kind of nasty scripts. It will automatically do this all for me. Now, the next thing I wanted to go through is not really the retrieve stuff, but talking about how we do the templating. And so templating, I've got a pre-prepared command here just to make things a bit quicker. We're going to run this here, and I'm just going to talk you through it. So basically, it's RT, which is retrieve template. And we've got here the trailhead example. Actually, it's going to be a bit different in this case. Query we're going to retrieve, and the query is called example DE. We're going to retrieve it like it was from the DE market. I'll show you in a second why that's relevant. Now here it said, actually, Doug, this credential doesn't exist. What are you talking about? Again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible where it doesn't just fail with no errors. We're going to try and correct it for you. So here we're going to say, I meant this one. So I'm just going to copy that for the next ones I'm going to do. Developer group. So what you can see is this is then downloaded, and we've put this into the template folder. And this is this kind of templating setup that we've done here. You can see that it's targeting a key which is not able to be understood. And we know that actually, okay, we've done these templates. We're trying our best to retrieve what's there and template out of it. But actually, realistically, you're always going to have to double check it and maintain it yourself because it's never going to be 100% perfect. So we're saying here, actually, I want this to go to the data extension, which is example _ suffix. Now we looked at those suffixes here quickly before. If you look up, the suffix is going to be _fr. Now, if this is going to go away, that would be great. And so what we can then do is say, we're going to set that one up, but the name here with the suffix, it's kind of a bit messy. So you can choose what to call this here. You can actually change any name you like, so long as these two are matching, that's fine. The second one we're going to run is one to get the data extension. So we're going to deploy the same data extension that we've got for this, so we can actually have somewhere for this query to send the data to. I want this to go away. Now I can see a secondary template here, which is going to be the same kind of setup. So suffix has been set up. And as I mentioned here, previously the customer key was something else. We've replaced that with the same thing as the name to try and make sure that it's nice and standardized and it's a bit easier to use within the system. So once we've set that up, we've then got the question of, cool, so we've got these templates, Doug. How do we actually use those if we want to roll out a new market? Well, in this case here, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what we're going to do if we wanted to roll out to France. So again, we're going to have a simple command like this, which is BD, which is build definition. So we're building the definition for this business unit for query for the example of France. Here, what you can see is then some data that's created in the deploy folder. You can see in here, this suffix has been replaced by FR, all correct here. And I guess I didn't save that target. So let me go back and check that one here. Save that one, and let's try and run that one again. So now it's then replaced that correctly. And so that will then set up all of those data correctly for queries. And we're going to do the same thing for the data extension. So the data extension will be created that says France, all correctly done. And you'll see another folder pop up here. And so you've got data extensions, again, correctly changed for France. Now, we have a command to do this in bulk. So you could basically set up a list of 60 markets if you wanted to, and just make that exact same command, and it would do exactly the same thing for 60 markets in exactly the same amount of time. So it's a very, very quick way to do those changes, especially one of the ones that we found was really useful. Even just the other day, I created 2 new data extensions for all of the different business units. And those are the kind of things where we say, well, you've already done a setup, Doug, but we need to have that additional that additional data extension or that additional field in the data extension that's already there. Same effort. So we just go to the template, we adapt the template, we change it a little bit, we deploy it, it's done. So it's very straightforward. And in this case here, what we're also then able to do is basically go back and deploy it. So MCDEV, we're going to put a D in here. It's going to ask for some credentials. Again, we could call those directly if we wanted to. We can either deploy everything. So it will deploy everything in this deploy folder. You can actually change it and say, I want to deploy everything from the retrieve folder and then deploy everything over top. The problem is that if you haven't retrieved recently or if someone's working on it, you're going to overwrite what they've done. And this is why we decided to put it into a separate folder. But that's, again, the choices that you can make. And you're able to actually configure here directly in the configuration file yourself. So you could change deploy goes from retrieve. That also will impact, obviously, the speed of things that are being deployed. So in our case, we're going to go and say, let's deploy this to France because we've set it up for the French business unit. It's then going to go some caching. So it's going to go to the folders. It's going to retrieve all the folders. It's going to take the paths and try and build that path that you saw before and say, okay, this actual path relates to folder ID 123, and then use the folder ID 123. You won't ever see it on this side here, but it automatically does that in the background. And what you can see is any kind of error messages or potentially important updates. So data retention policies, again, restrictions of the API, we can't change. But what we can see is that I've actually already deployed this before in a previous example, and it's updated that. So if you've seen here, you might have, for example, 20 data extensions, you'd see 20 data extensions. It will automatically pick up whether to update or create. You don't have to worry about that, it does it for you. Now, I mentioned to you the fourth kind of aspect here, which is really around documentation. So that's something here that we've nicely created. If you can see the docs folder here, which you can see created in Markdown, for those of you who are familiar with that, where you can basically preview this exactly like a kind of nice formatting. You could copy this directly into Jira and it would automatically give you this kind of formatting. We have also docs for roles. So you can automatically give you an overview of all the roles and the comparable permissions. So it's a lot easier for you to go to someone and say, what's the difference between this role and this role? We're working on trying to improve some of those. We'll come to that in a second. The last thing is really around the search features. So let's imagine that I want to see, hey, is this data extension used in any queries? Well, I can go to the retrieve folder, click find, and I can say, well, this is the name of the data extension. So I'm going to go and retrieve that. I want to search in any folder, for those of you that are familiar with VS Code, in any folder called query, and in the retrieve folder. And that will then return to me basically those references for this query. And I can go, oh, cool, that's great. I can see this query. What does this query do? That's really straightforward. So this is the kind of idea that we've got with this kind of search features. Again, for me, the most useful use case for this is actually we can retrieve journeys, but we can't deploy journeys, being transparent about that. But when you retrieve journeys, being able to see, did this field or did this data extension actually get used in any journeys, so that we know whether we can delete it and just tidy things up after a while. Now that's kind of the end from the demo perspective. So if we just jump back into the setup here, well, one of the main things, and we're going to see this in a second from Eliot, is really talking about package manager. So we're talking about what the focus is there, and it's one of the big questions that we got asked about why this was. Now, we also spoke actively with the product team actually a couple of years ago, who was doing the deployment manager setup, and we kind of talked with them around what exactly the targets were and how things were going. And that was also one of those moments where we decided, okay, we see where things are going there, but we think actually using a more CLI developer-friendly approach makes a lot of sense for us. So that's really describing today what you're seeing the same thing. Now you're seeing here on one side, you're looking at package manager, which does support journeys. It supports a lot of things with data model and content. Now those are the kind of things that are going to be really focused for marketeers. There's a lot of gaps, however. So things like, for example, file imports aren't supported in package manager, whereas we support file imports. So that's really focusing more not on those maybe the things that the marketeers would be using, but more on what the developers would be using, that more focus on the metadata end of the spectrum rather than the kind of data end of the spectrum. Now, this is a quick example here of some of the comparisons. For example, we don't support journeys. There's partial support for journeys in Package Manager. We support automations, pretty much exclusively everything. There's a couple of things we don't support, but they're more exotic variations. Automations with Package Manager, quite limited still. Same thing with develop scripts and queries. You can write SSJS in MCDEV Tools in VS Code and deploy those directly from VS Code. That's not something you're going to do in Package Manager. So some examples there about what's really possible, and really I'm trying to understand what we're actually able to achieve. Again, if you're marketeers, Package Manager might be a great tool for you, depending on your exact use cases. If you're a bit more developer friendly, you're comfortable with a CLI, then MCDEV Tools could exactly be the tool for you for those really big scaled out deployments, or even just having that kind of copy locally. Now, the last thing from my side is really talking about the roadmap in the future. We're also looking to extend this with the VS Code extension. We're doing some rewrites of the kind of core libraries right now to make sure that the CLI and the core logic is kind of separated so that we can more easily integrate that with VS Code. So you can do your standard right-click deploy. That would make it a lot easier for people rather than having to run a whole command. There's some things we need to change there around caching, so that goes a bit more efficiently. We're also looking at extending the reports. I showed you the example from a data extension. We're also looking to try and build some things in there which are around, for example, security audits. So being able to automatically call APIs using the same exact credentials, the same setup we have, to be able to build kind of a security audit, check, for example, old users, again, as part of this kind of CLI setup that you might want to have in your CI/CD pipelines that checks every day, hey, are these users no longer here? If so, please send notification. We're also looking to consider at some point, how would that actually work with Package Manager? So we've checked out the exact files that are there in the formats. There certainly probably would be some challenges with it, but in general, the objective is that if we can actually try and take the best of both worlds, but we can build a package and hand it over to some of the marketeers and say, hey, here's a great package that actually works. It was developed and nicely created within MCDEV Tools and VS Code, but it still works with Package Manager. Then lastly, it's an open source project, so it's got the Accenture name on it, of course, but if you're working with any SI, if you're working independently, you're working with end clients, we're more than happy to have contributors here help out with the project. The reason that we wanted to really open source this is that we want to be transparent about what we're doing. We want to make this easy for clients. It's certainly no shame in saying it's partly a marketing activity, of course. But we really want to make that visible. You can see there also some of the issues and the enhancements that we've put in ourselves that we're looking to improve. So it's very transparent for everyone there. You can check it out on the bit.ly link here. It just goes through to the GitHub site. Feel free to take part, make suggestions. If you see bugs, feel free to contribute as well. So from my side, that's all. Thanks very much, everyone. Do feel free to reach out. You've got all my details here. If you really are excited to hear some more or you want to know something better, again, feel free to either give me a ping here or even suggest it through the GitHub side if you're looking for some more detailed information on it. From that side there, I'm going to hand back to Eliot, who I can see is now back at an office or at home. I'm not sure where he is today, but at least not in the car.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Doug. That is absolutely incredible. I'm just kind of blown away with what you've actually been able to pull off. I mean, for me, the power in having the CLI approach is just thinking of what you can do with it. I've just been working very closely for the past few months with GitHub Actions and setting up CI/CD workflows. And, I noticed that there are several pre-packaged actions for Salesforce DX. And I'm thinking, there's nothing stopping you from going and using this with GitHub Actions that will go and do something like, for an email that you've checked in, if you committed to a certain branch, it will automatically create a pull request, run your DevTools CLI commands, and then on success, once it's been successfully deployed, then it will merge that pull request. It's just kind of mind-blowing. So yeah, that's. Have you thought about GitHub Actions and creating kind of custom?
So I think some of the guys on the team. So I work with Jörn Berkefeld in the German team, and he is more focused on some of those DevOps things. He really likes working in the DevOps end of the spectrum. I'm more of the day-to-day, so I see more of the search and the retrieve stuff. Right. So I think it's really a matter of focus. So from his side, I think we've set it up for some things to work with Bitbucket pipelines with Jenkins and with something else. I can't remember what it was. But I think it's definitely something that if there's, again, those requests, there's issues on GitHub, feel free to open an enhancement request and we're more than happy to look into it because especially some of those things are really not hard for us to get implemented. And we're happy to see those improvements. If you've got a suggestion for how to do it, feel free to put in a pull request there so we can have a look at it and merge it in as well. So awesome. Open source project, we want everyone to be involved.
Great, okay, thanks. I just can't wait to get started. But until then, I'm just going to go and jump into the second stage of this presentation today, this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. And let me just go back in the presentation mode here, which is Marketing Cloud Package Manager. Again, we've reordered this. So firstly, I just want to start off by educating people who are unfamiliar with Package Manager. You've probably seen it pop up in the past month. Before I talk about that, I want to talk about Deployment Manager. So Deployment Manager was released 3 years ago. In fact, in April 2019, 3 years to the month before a Package Manager, a Deployment Manager came out. So Deployment Manager was released to enable journey and automation configurations to be exported, which can then be imported into a different environment, like perhaps a different business unit or a different Marketing Cloud account. The problem is that while Salesforce, and I'll just be completely honest here, while they had ambitious plans for Deployment Manager, and you can actually see those plans if you jump onto App Exchange and Salesforce Labs and have a look for those slides, where they're saying that we're going to have support for folders and contact model and content and emails and much more. It never progressed really since that initial release. And of course, as it was on App Exchange, it's not built into the product, it wasn't supported by Salesforce. You can't open up a kind of a help desk ticket on it. Salesforce in the April release released Package Manager. And I got an early preview of this. And now at the time, the plan was to bring it on App Exchange. And I said, oh, no, not again. But I'm relieved to see that it's built into the core product in Marketing Cloud, and it's available on all editions today. And it enables you to go and bundle up content and assets, and also go and add some personalization, be it, as we'll see in the demo, such as inserting like a company name or a logo or a website URL into specific content in your email. And Doug, if you just mind going on mute, that'd be great.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. So next, it also goes and creates dependencies to other objects. So when you go and select our highest level objects, for example, an email, which references different content blocks, Package Manager goes and finds those content blocks and copies those dependencies for you. So let me just jump over to this slide here. You should be able to see that. I think it's important to, before you decide whether Package Manager is right for you, have a look at which objects it supports. As certainly in its current state, it's actually quite limited. Like, for example, with automations, it doesn't include import activities. You can only have these activities here. And there are some kind of gotchas that when I stumbled on today, I was trying to package up an email which included the Cloud Pages URL AMP script function, which is obviously quite common, and it wouldn't let you because that's unsupported, because they can't go and package up Cloud Pages, at least not at this time. So let's go and see it in action. Again, we can use this for packaging content from Content Builder, journeys and Journey Builder, automations and data extensions and more. So for this demo, I'm going to show you how to go and package up a journey. You can see this is quite a simple journey. And if I go and open up this email here, we can see I've actually done a couple of things to this email. Once it opens, just thinking about it. And while it's opening, let me just go and explain what I've done so you know where to go and find this. If you go and click on this link of Package Manager Customization, you'll see that you can add these mustache tags to your content, be it on, at the moment in an email. I think kind of in the future will be a landing page. If we go and edit this message here, almost done. You'll observe that I've, in my subject line here, I've gone and used one of those placeholders that is there's a MCPM : company name. And I've also done the same in some AMP script. I've got a logo here, which is going to display in my email. And I've also got another string here. So MPCM company website. So these, of course, these are entirely optional, but enable anyone who's deploying the package to go and add personalization at that stage, and it will go and take those values and substitute this mustache kind of a tag with whatever the values that they choose. So anyway, that's the kind of journey. Let's go into Package Manager now, and we see all the available journeys, the automations, assets, and more. But we're going to go and select that journey. So there's our welcome journey. I'm going to go and choose to package one item and click on this package items button. So you can see it's kind of all declarative. So not using a kind of command line, but it's quite user friendly. And I have to say that I'm here. This has really taken a lot of kind of hand rolling to get a journey which can be packaged up. I've seen that in the vast majority of existing journeys and automations, I can't package them because there are unsupported issues with emails, or they can't find related content, or like I'm using Cloud Pages URL script function. Just bear in mind you may well experience similar issues. Here's one small notification, and what does this say here? I'm going to click on here, unresolved variable logo URL. I mean, that's benign, so it's just kind of a warning. I know what that's about. So I'm fine with this. I'm going to go and click next. And now I can go and choose fields that whoever's deploying the package can configure. So like perhaps you're a Marketing Cloud partner and you want to go and put together, out of the box, I guess this is my welcome journey and post-purchase journey and or whatever. We can go and insert, I guess, these placeholder tags where a person can substitute, say, a company name and logo. And in fact, at this time, you only have 3 options: company name, logo, and company website. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go and click on this first one, a company name, and we want the step to be displayed saying enter your company name. And let's go in ahead and enter a default value. I'm going to call this one a carved rock fitness, and save that and go on to the next one. So which is I'll save and close maybe, which is logo here. I can change the order. We're going to company website. Enter your company website. And logo, enter your logo URL, save and close. So they're all configured and I've ordered, and I can now go and download my package. So again, in a similar fashion, it just downloads a file. This is actually a zip file with structured folders. And I can now go and take this package and upload it to another business unit, or maybe a completely different Marketing Cloud account. At this stage, I'm just going to go and switch across to Northern Trail Outfitters, let's say a parent business unit here. And I'm still in the app in Package Manager. So I'll just wait for that to open up. And here it is. And so instead of package items, I'm going to click this deploy button. And so when I do, I can go and upload that zip file that I downloaded earlier, which should be waiting for me in my downloads folder. And there it is. If I go and click next, optionally, I can go and define which folder that this is created in, the assets are in. So let's call it maybe carve or fitness welcome maybe. And I can optionally prefix or suffix a string to the name of each asset. So in this case, we want maybe CRF, and you can see as I do so, it's doing this. So I'm doing this here, very similar, in fact, to what Doug was showing with DevTools. I can also optionally append something to my name, like X here. You can see that it's put X, which I won't do, and put a unique timestamp, which I don't think we'll do. We'll just remove that. And if I click next, and here I have, I'm guided through the personalization and customization options that I defined when I created the package. So enter my company name, and look, there's the value that I defined as the default value. Maybe I want to go and change this to Carve or Fitness Australia. My company website is www.carvedrockfitness.com. s.com. My logo URL, here's one I created earlier. Here it is, like a cooking show. And then this thing classification, I'll just go with a default thing classification. Well, these are, of course, all the thing classifications which are available in this business unit. And click deploy and see what happens. So wait for the deployment to finish. Doug did warn you, if you pay close attention in that one of his last slides in the presentation, that this can take a while, whereas Accenture DevTools takes seconds to do. But I'm just going to go back to, here we are now. Just wait. An error occurred. Please ensure it's a valid package. Wow, isn't that interesting? So it certainly worked when I tested it earlier. But let's go back and see what's happening here. I suspect Journey Builder maybe created everything with a different prefix. All journeys. Are you welcome, Journey? Yeah. No, it should. I should see it here. I'm not quite sure, but like a cooking show, here's one I created earlier called Hey, You Welcome Journey. So I'll just go and click on this one here. And you can see that it created the data extension, the emails, and all the activities within it. And if I open an email, I haven't seen what it's actually done here. So while we're just waiting for this to open, I must say that I'll be kind of quite honest with you, and I know that Salesforce staff are on this call. I've been a little bit underwhelmed with Package Manager. I mean, it shows great promise, as we can see here. Look, here's card block thickness. This personalization that was added, and we've got other personalization here. I'll just go and click next actually and have a look. I've been somewhat underwhelmed, I guess, with the usability of Package Manager in its current form. Almost every single journey and automation that I've created, I haven't been able to use Package Manager successfully. Even this one we just had a look at, which certainly worked earlier today. But I'm just going to go and preview this data extension just with maybe shared data extensions. And no, I think, do I have any in here? I probably don't. I apologize. Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make, and we can actually see it in here, it's going to put in that image URL here. It's going to put in that the name there, and it's inserted also kind of a name there too. So yeah, it shows you how that personalization feature works. Yeah, that's Package Manager in a nutshell. We've now got some time for questions. I'm going to go and stop sharing and invite Doug to answer questions. There's been lots of activity in the chat window. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat window. There is we don't see any Q&A panel here today. So let's have a look at these. It said, can we get access to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud sandbox that you demoed? Yes, I think the answer is politely no. Oh, in fact, you've already provided that. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to add them to the chat window now.
I think, Vlad, you've got a point here on documentation as well, and kind of searchability. I think definitely it's one of those things that we're looking at trying to improve from MCDEV Tools. As I mentioned, like security reports and stuff like this is something that's really interesting for us. Just to kind of put those kind of automated things that we use in a lot of cases, like how do we extract a view of all the different data extensions, all these different metrics? How can we make that a bit easier? And we have a lot of stuff already built into the tools, which allows us to basically go and download all the data. Now the question is, how was it used and all this kind of stuff? We definitely would like to see some of those improve, but it's always one of those questions of priority. So I think for us, one of the first ones that we really want to try and improve is really having that through VS Code to make everyone's life a bit easier. And then based on that, we'll then be able to have a lot more of those kind of nice to haves added in.
So am I incorrect in stating that Accenture DevTools is like Salesforce DX for Marketing Cloud, or not quite?
It's kind of the focus we've tried to make it. Yeah, exactly.
Right,
so we've
okay.
definitely agreed that we're not going to build a UI at this point. That was a discussion we had early on, and we decided that actually the effort to maintain a UI and manage a UI was going to be so high that we essentially said we'd rather focus on having new features so we can actually do more things for those developer skills, because that was the stuff that, quite frankly, I need on a daily basis. It's the stuff that my colleague Jörn needs on a daily basis. So we said, well, if we need this and we're the ones building it, then we're going to focus on those things because for us, that's what's most relevant. UI was less of a question, but obviously, as you can see, we've tried to make it a bit of a friendly CLI so that it kind of helps correct things, and it automatically tells you if it's not correct. It tells you what you need to do. So we've tried to make it as friendly as possible within the CLI context.
Yeah, I mean, this is a DevOps tool at the end of the day. I mean, it's certainly not my expectation you have a UI around that.
Yep.
Some kind of
I can see here DevTools. So yeah, we've got component support. So if you go to the website, we have a whole list of the components we support. If you download the tools, you can also see all the components we support. There's often some differences. So for example, we support retrieving of assets. So all of the content builder stuff and all of the journeys, we actually retrieve those, but we don't do any kind of changes for deployments. So you can deploy assets. I think we have that in there, but we can't deploy journeys just because of the amount of dependencies that we have, which are way too complex for us to manage. So we decided to actively focus on different areas where it was a bit easier and where the APIs were more supportive, unfortunately. So it's a bit limited in that sense, but it's what we have.
How about Cloud Pages?
Cloud Pages don't have public APIs.
Yeah, they don't.
They're only private APIs, and I've definitely done some projects where we had one project where we did have to migrate that, and we essentially bastardized the APIs of the private APIs to make them work. So we were able to move things, but it was definitely not something that I would recommend, and it's not a publicly supported feature, and it's very messy. So definitely not something that's there. And again, that's where it comes down to missing APIs.
So a question from Joseph, and I had the same question. So just to be clear, you're just using the public APIs, not the internal APIs, which are exposed through
this is exclusively the public APIs. Some of them are not documented, so I'm proudly using undocumented APIs. So we make no promises around this. And we've basically dug in through all the REST endpoints to try and dig out what exactly data is there and what we can actually use it. We also found during our activities a lot of bugs with a lot of all relatively small things, but things that were challenging for us. But it's been an exciting experience trying to find out how to use some of those undocumented ones.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, the internal ones we're well familiar with and we looked into doing, but yeah, without having a, let's say, clearly defined way to authenticate that doesn't use the UI, it's not really easy to do.
Right. There's a feature idea you might want to read. Any other questions? Do you have any other kind of remarks at all?
From my side, no, not at this point.
Good. I mean, I'm just.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, will it be uploaded to Cloud Kettle's YouTube channel? So no, it won't. Not to that channel. It will be available, and we're going to share a link in the next 24 hours. So I must say, I'm just completely blown away with what you've pulled off here. I mean, it must have taken thousands of hours of effort to go and put together.
Again, as all good developers know, why spend 10 minutes doing something manually? You can spend 3 hours automating. So that's essentially the story of this, where we're like, no, we want to do it automatically. So we've really tried to make that happen as much as we could and tried to make it as easy as possible.
And it's very generous to actually give this to the community. It's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as I say, it's twofold. So it definitely is a marketing activity from our side. We're really transparent about that. It's on Accenture's GitHub side. So we want everyone to see here some of the cool stuff we're doing internally. It's partly a marketing activity on that side, but you know, if anyone's using it, we're more than happy to have this shared with everyone. And I think it makes everyone's life easier. It makes our lives easier internally. So we can say to all of the clients that we work with, we don't have to worry about contracts and licenses, just use it. Go ahead, find out, try and improve it, make it as easy as possible. So definitely something that we want to have everyone involved in. And again, if you're a competitor of ours, more than happy to have you as well contribute to it. It really is something that we're happy to also mention your names on and have everyone share it as well. So.
Awesome. So how do we do that? We just submit a pull request to you?
So for contributors, if you're, let's say, wanting to just contribute some of the small things, then feel free to just submit a pull request. And that way you'll pop up there as contributor. If you're more actively interested in wanting to get involved in helping the team, so acting as part of the core team who does the maintaining, then feel free to also reach out to me. You've got my details there, or you can just put an issue in and say, hey, we're interested, and you'll be able to get in touch with us, and then we can maybe have some small chats around what you'd like to do and what your focus is. I can see here, what are the small things? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but if you've got, let's say, a new report that you want to build, or you see there's a bug and you want to fix it, it's all NPM, basically Node.js code. So it's pretty straightforward to go into and dig into if you're familiar with Node.js. There's no real technical difficulties in that. It's just a lot of code. It's a lot of complex code. But if there are, for example, a bug that you want to try and fix, just open a pull request, create a fork of it, create a pull request back into the repository, and we'll do the review for you.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Doug, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And yes, a copy of this presentation will be available shortly. So enjoy the rest of your day or evening.
Cheers, guys. Bye.